Oh, so this will be interesting. I don't have a whole lot of time. I have a doctor's appointment this morning. Whew. This is one of those things where I knew I'd be thinking about it all day if I didn't address it. So I'm gonna go ahead and we are going to watch Matt's video, which, again, I don't disagree with a lot of his points, actually. I think it's a good video for the most part, but I think that where we differ is important to point out. So that is where we're going to be going with this. So let's get going here.
The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents Talking Heathen.
Can you let me know in the chat if you just heard the video starting, if that audio came through, just to be sure before we get going. I like to have all my technical glitches out of the way right at the beginning so we can get into the meat of the video without the glitchiness, hopefully. All right.
Hey everybody, lately there's been a bit of a mild dust-up between a few people I know and people I like and I'm friends with about the word heathen and how it's being used. In particular, there are objections to the atheist community of Austin using it in the name of one of our Sunday shows, Talk Heathen. Now, Rudy B., who's a co-host of the show, is in favor of changing the name and has given a couple reasons, and Ocean Keltoy has put out a video on it. And normally I wouldn't use the Atheist Debates Project to, it's all of a sudden we're dueling on the word heathen. But I think there's some interesting...
Yeah, I will say right off the bat, I appreciate Matt being clear about that this isn't meant to be it's not a duel, it's not a war, it's not an us versus them thing, but there are arguments on both sides which, should be addressed.
Things here about the way people fell into this discussion and how bad arguments are being used in a way that might impact how we view debates and things as well. Now, first of all, disclaimers right off the bat. I am not in charge of Talk Heathen. I'm not in charge of the show. I'm not in charge of the name, never have been, don't have any say in it. So my opinion on whether or not Talk Heathen should change its name and how or why it should change its name isn't relevant. It's not going to impact anything, which is why
I would say that isn't true. Not because Matt is actually in charge of the show. He's not. He's totally correct in saying that. But I would disagree that it has no impact. Because if there is any consideration for whether or not Talk Heathen is going to change its name, the people who are in charge are certainly going to be listening to my arguments and his arguments. So it does matter. It's not inconsequential. Granted, he doesn't have any direct ability to change the show, that's true, but, putting his thoughts and arguments out there is not inconsequential. I don't think that would be fair to say.
Talking about it, because this is not going to impact anything, but I am in favor of changing the name of the show, but not for bad reasons. I'm fine with changing the name of the show if there are good reasons to change the name of the show, if it's for marketing purposes. There are things, and basically Ocean and Rudy, in my opinion, have given bad reasons. I like both of them, but this isn't the way to make a point. And while Ocean did make a couple of cool points that I'll address, I don't know that it rises to the level of renaming the show. In quick summary in a tweet.
And I think that's all fair, but I will say my own thoughts before getting into it is that I agree with what most of Matt has to say in this video, but I don't think that my reasons are bad, and I think that that's only because maybe Matt and I just have different values on certain areas of this topic. So it's not necessarily a matter of reasoning. But I agree with most of what he has to say about the actual arguments, but we'll get into that.
Rudy's case was essentially in part that we're using a label that is also used by a smaller group, and it's wrong for us to kind of keep it from. And Ocean's case.
Is that a straw man? No, because I don't think it's intentional. But I don't think that that is entirely a summary of my position on this topic. Not entirely accurate, I guess. But I also don't think that that's intentional, so I'm not going to call it a straw man or anything. But I'll get more into what my actual position is further on, but I will say that that is at least part of it, is that I think that it makes... Okay, I'll just wait to get into it.
This was more that it sows confusion about the label and makes it more difficult for religious heathens, pagans, to find each other. So what's the deal? I would love to not reference a dictionary here at all. Ocean and I agree that they describe usage and they don't just prescriptively dictate how a word should or must be used.
I absolutely agree here, and it was really frustrating when we were initially sort of having this discussion on Twitter that so many people were going straight to the dictionary. It's like, oh my god, what have we been doing all this time? I mean, whenever pedantic arguments come up within the atheist community, going straight to the dictionary and being like, what the dictionary says is like the worst thing to do, because as Matt said, they describe usage. They're not prescriptive, they're descriptive. So being like, well, the dictionary says is it just doesn't make sense. It's not a good argument. But yeah.
Important information in the dictionary entries and in the etymology and historical usage of the terms. If we take a look at the history of the words pagan and heathen, they used to mean very similar things, and what they used to mean isn't what either of them mean now in the pagan community and in the heathenry community. Neither of them conformed.
And I will say that that's like true. I mean, there's honestly a lot of this video that I could skip because in summary it describes the ancient usage of the word heathen, or at least the words that were translated as heathen in many Bibles and stuff like that. When atheists are talking about the word heathen, they mean anybody who's not Jewish or a Christian, depending on, what area of the Bible you're talking about. Just the non-God's chosen people. Which, nobody is debating. Nobody is debating whether or not the word heathen means that or has meant that, or if that is a correct usage of the word. That's never been in debate. So, when heathens are talking about historical usage, specifically describing themselves, I mean, it was adapted as a term that they adapted to be about themselves, or at least was commonly used to describe them. That's not to say that there haven't been other usages of the word, but there is some historical precedent for calling themselves heathen as a religious group. That doesn't invalidate other usages of the word heathen, however, but there is precedent for that. And granted, I will say that, historical usage, it makes sense that wouldn't be something that's particularly relevant or interesting to atheists, and it would be to heathens, because a lot of heathenry is based on historical reconstructionism. It's based on taking what happened back then and trying to make it now. Trying to recreate that same sort of religion and practice. And obviously, to an atheist, what has been done traditionally is not relevant. At least for a lot of people. And I totally understand that. But, I think that it's important to acknowledge where this sort of disparity between understandings is coming in, because a heathen referencing historical usage of the word and an atheist being like, so what? makes sense because of where everybody in the conversation is coming from. You know, their whole religion is based on history. So, yeah. But anyway, let me get back into the video.
Current use for modern paganism. The two words used to mean things like outsider, inhabiting the open country, the people who aren't civilized, the wild people, people of the land, people of the hearth, people of the heath. There's even a dictionary entry that talks.
Yeah, I might actually skip this whole part because it's, I mean, yeah, in summary, we're talking about the origins of the word heathen, which, like, everybody relevant to this conversation probably already knows. And like I said, I have stuff to do, so.
Version of the Bible. I did a lot of research on this in 1841. This is not a common or popular word. This is not a particularly...
Oh, so now he's going into how, if you look into the usage of the word heathen in literature, it's never been very popular or common, which, yeah. I mean, yeah, nobody's really arguing that, I don't think. But
with 150 instances of the word heathen, the word that's used there is Hebrew one. Clearly, the Old Testament usage of the Hebrew word goy, or egregious, or terrible, you know.
Okay, and now he's going into the fact that, you know, heathen used to just be a descriptor of anybody who wasn't Christian or Jewish, and but it became a pejorative, which, again, totally true. It definitely is used as a pejorative, and that pejorative does, in its definition, include atheists in it. You know, I'm not arguing against that by any means, and there is definitely something empowering about taking back a label that has been used as a pejorative against you. Again, that has never been anything that I've been trying to argue against.
Matthew's written a little differently than a lot of the rest of the New Testament. And of all the other instances translated as heathen, and all of those instances where the words are translated as heathen, they're trying to disparage those foreigners, those Gentiles.
Already established that.
People who have strange ways that are not ours. Now, in the video that Ocean put together, he's fine with atheists using the term amongst themselves, just not in marketing or show name sense, which is an admission that there is a context in which the term applies to atheists. He just doesn't.
Again, this is something that I've heard from a lot of atheists that have been sort of in this sort of discussion, and it's like nobody is saying the word heathen doesn't apply to atheists. That has never been... That's just never been what anybody has been arguing. So... Again, I'm not sure if I want to call this a straw man as much as just a misunderstanding, but yeah, yeah. And again, when we're talking about the historical usage of a word, obviously that has a lot more weight to heathens than it does to atheists. I think that should go without saying, but for some reason nobody has acknowledged that, so I'm trying to acknowledge it to say, hey, this is one of the places where maybe we're not seeing eye to eye on this issue, is that when heathens are talking about historical usage of this word and how it applies to them, that's something that holds a lot more weight. So, yeah. Atheists might just be saying, well, it's been used to describe all of us at one point or another, so what the fuck does it matter? I can see both sides of that, but anyway.
Doesn't want it used in the name of shows because, as he notes, it makes it more difficult for pagan heathens to find each other. Imagine if a Scientology group posted a video claiming that my use of the hang up as a show title somehow made it more difficult for Scientologists to find each other. Or if Jains did it, or the Amish did it, or the Wiccans did it. My response would be, good. I'm in favor of people advocating for irrational religious beliefs having difficulty finding each other. It's not my job, nor is it my interest, to make it easier for people with superstitious beliefs to find each other.
This is where Matt and I part ways on this whole topic. I value heathen allyship. I value pagan allyship because at least a lot of the ones that I know and a lot of the more prominent voices who are in the heathen community specifically aren't advocating for woo and are actively fighting against it. And they are attempting to promote skepticism. We don't come to the same conclusions, and I certainly don't believe that the things that they believe are necessarily true or accurate description of reality. But I also am not willing to burn that bridge, because as long as I have been an atheist, pagans have been just as much of a support in my life and in my community. And, you know, pagans watch my videos, pagans help spread our content and watch our content and enjoy our content. Pagans engage with us in a way that a lot of Christians cannot do respectfully, or seem incapable of doing respectfully. I think to just sort of put them in with any other religious group, especially starting off with Scientology of all things, like a straight up, very harmful cult, I think that that is... yeah, that definitely rubs me the wrong way. I think to... And I have been accused in all of this of sort of, bowing down to the wishes of the religious, and that's why the atheists are not super happy with me. And frankly, nobody asked me to do this. When I became... I already didn't like the name Talk Heathen before I was a host of the show. And now that I am a host of the show, I'm like, I can maybe actually do something about that. And I already was thinking about that when I started talking to Ocean about it, and he's never told me what to do. I've never been directed to do anything. I have gotten advice from heathens when I expressed to them what my goals were, but, I'm not... if anything, I would call it compromise in the way that I have to coexist with any religious group, except this particular religious group has gone out of their way to make themselves allies to me. So yeah, I don't owe them anything as a religious group, but I also take them more seriously because they have done a lot for me in my community, or at least they have tried to, and generally speaking, I have no reason to think that they are asking for something unreasonable or in bad faith, or like this isn't like you give them an inch, they want a mile type of situation. I don't think this is all that unreasonable. It was a conclusion I came to myself without consulting heathens. And when I did consult heathens, it confirmed what I already thought, which is that this isn't something that is good for them. I don't think that there's any reason to dismiss them. They're not, generally speaking, bad faith actors, so I don't really... and just labeling them as like, oh, well, you're all irrational. It's like... everybody holds irrational beliefs. Everybody does. We all try not to, at least most of us try not to, but we all do. But to just be like, I don't know. I can't get behind this so dismissive attitude. And frankly, I don't carry that kind of attitude with me when I'm talking about other groups. At least I try not to. I don't feel like I'm that dismissive of Christianity or Islam or any other religious group, even the culty crazy ones, because I've been in a culty crazy group, and I understand that I wasn't mentally deficient in any way. I wasn't purposefully acting irrationally, not that you can, I guess, perfectly, and I'm not saying that Matt's saying any of those things, because obviously that would be, me adding a lot more words to what he has said than he has actually said. I guess my point is just that I don't. Yeah, I guess I just can't get on board with that kind of mentality, because at the end of the day, the difference between us is that I value pagan allyship. I think that that's the major difference here, is that I value pagan allyship. I put some stock in that, and I don't think it's that big of a deal to change the name of a show to reflect that allyship. It already rubbed me the wrong way as somebody who okay. Let's get back into the video.
Especially when the word that they're objecting to isn't theirs, is one that applies to all of us. Now, Ocean's strongest point.
Again, nobody is claiming that this word only applies to the heathen community. That's never been, an argument that it only applies to them. Heathen does apply to atheists in the same way that it also applies to Muslims. And it applies to Wiccans, and it applies to, depending on who you are, it could apply to Jehovah's Witnesses, because, some Christians would call Jehovah's Witnesses not Christian, even though Jehovah's Witnesses call themselves true Christians. It's just a pejorative, othering word. That's what it is. But what? Okay, sorry. Let me get back into the video.
And I agree with this quite a bit, is that the word in Talk Heathen doesn't adequately describe what the show is. Fair point.
That, I think, is the most important point, which is just that when we're talking, if heathen just means anybody who's not a Christian or not Jewish, then that applies to so many, 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 many religious groups as well as atheists. So calling the show Talk Heathen definitely doesn't, because it's not it applies to atheists, but it's not a synonym for atheists. So using it to describe an atheist show kind of is it just an anti-Christian show but includes the voices of lots of other people? No. In fact, the show Talk Heathen has often taken a tone that is mocking or dismissive of other groups that the word heathen would apply to, which is something that I've never been super cool with anyway. But I'd like to bring the tone of the show back a little bit, at least when I'm hosting, to being more about having a discussion. Granted, sometimes those discussions are not going to be super, super civil, but that uncivility is not going to be coming from my end. That is my own personal goal. And I've never had any problem with pagans. I've never had... My cat's trying to get into the room, but I'm not going to let him because he has destroyed so many pairs of earbuds. He cannot be in the room with all the computers. Anyways, I guess it just comes down to the fact that I value pagan allyship, and I think that this is such a small thing for us to be able to change. And I don't think that's a bad reason. I'm not I don't think that I'm just caving into what the religious people want. And frankly, we have to coexist with religious people regardless. I can believe that all of them are wrong and still not be a dick. And I don't think that... I understand also that the word heathen is particularly empowering to some atheists. I understand that that word is particularly important to some atheists, and I get that, and I don't begrudge them the use of that word by any means. I just think that the name of the show doesn't make sense, and it would be helpful to some heathens if we changed it. And I don't mind helping heathens because they have always helped me. I don't have an issue with that. And maybe I'm not as anti-theist as some people would like. I'm not as anti-theist as a lot of watchers of ACA shows would like. And sorry, not sorry. Like, that's just what it is.
He'd be even more right if his preferred usage of the word heathen was what the show intended, but it isn't. In the King James, for example, goy is translated as heathen.
We already went over that.
The word has been used to describe all non-Judeo-Christians since then. The usage for the show Talk Heathen is clear in the closing remarks that have traditionally been along with the show, and that is the show exists for those people who have traditionally been othered, dismissed, disparaged, because they are not part of the Judeo-Christian religion.
That's just straight up not true. Because the show doesn't exist for all of those people. It exists for atheists exclusively. I think that that is the one point where I'm just going to say, no, that's straight up not true. The show doesn't exist for the community of all people who have been othered by Judeo-Christian religions. That's just not true. It exists for atheists. It is by atheists. It is for atheists. It entertains atheists. And it often is dismissive of or mocks or others occasionally people who the label heathen would also fit that are not atheists. That, again, is something that I would like to change, at least on my own end of the show. But no, Talk Heathen isn't for all heathens. It is for a specific subset of heathens called atheists. And it does, in fact, isolate other people who the word heathen might apply to.
That usage is correct, it's historically accurate, and it's not every other heathen's fault that some pagans want to make the word their own. Similar things have been done with barbarian and other words like that. In fact,
again, I don't think that it is accurate to say that heathens are trying to get exclusive usage of this word. But that's already been said. Moving on.
On a recent episode of the Transatlantic Call-In Show, Rudy B., who tweeted about this and is a co-host on Talk Heathen, and someone I like Ocean, I like but all these people. There's no
I like you too, Matt.
Here, but when asked about who was or wasn't queer enough, made
rar fighting. I love that. Sorry, go on.
A brilliant response, essentially saying that whether or not they were queer enough for some queer folk, they were definitely queer enough to be marginalized by conservative evangelicals and queer phobes.
I stand by that point. The call was about somebody sort of worrying about, feeling like they weren't queer enough, and I basically told them, you're always going to be queer enough for queer phobes. I'll tell you that. You can be even a little bit queer, and that will be enough to freak them out. So no worries there. But I'll let Matt finish his point.
It's strange that this great point didn't register when Rudy was considering who was or wasn't heathen enough.
That, I will say, is a straw man, because this discussion has never been about who is heathen enough to use the word heathen. That has certainly never been the case. Nobody is saying that atheists aren't heathen enough to use the term heathen. That has never been an argument that anybody has made, and I think that I think that I would call a straw man, because that's just not what anybody is saying here. I don't think. I mean, I could call myself a heathen. Like, I'm a heathen by the definition of the word, by the common usage of the word. I'm a heathen. That is true. And nope, there's no litmus test for heathenness. That's never been what anybody has been talking about. And I don't know where he's pulling this idea from, because nobody has said anything along these lines of not being heathen enough. And if it were just like a brief point or like a slip of the tongue or whatever, I could probably just, brush past it. But he hammers on this point for a little while, which is why I would go so far as to say that this is just a straw man argument, because nobody is trying to argue this.
Now, as I said, I'm not the person who makes this decision. I'm in favor of changing the name, but only if it makes sense from a marketing standpoint and only if it's based on a good argument. But if you're making the argument, you're making it hard for pagans to find each other with the heathen label. That's not a good argument. You're using a word that
It is a good argument if you care about heathens.
Smaller marginalized group would like to use. Also, not a good argument. It's okay for you to use it to
Why? Why isn't that a good argument? I don't think that was ever actually addressed in this video. Yeah, no, that point was never addressed in this video.
Describe yourself among yourselves, but not in a public setting where someone else might associate it with a group I'm not fond of. Also isn't a good argument.
That also wasn't my argument. I think using the word heathen as if it is synonymous with atheist is not wrong, not like, oh, you shouldn't, like, it doesn't make sense, and it excludes a lot of people who that word applies to, who are not atheists.
In the end, I like the word. My Guitar Hero band name was Godless Heathens. I like using it in the same kind of edgy, pick up the slur and wear it like a mantle fashion that many people have done with the word queer and other terms.
I don't think it's quite the same. Not gonna lie. I don't think most atheists have been impacted by the word heathen as a pejorative the way that the word queer has been used as an actual can't say it on TV slur. Yeah, that's a bit of a stretch.
It isn't about the name of the show. It's about how many people believed they, like me, genuinely like Rudy and Ocean, and just gave them the benefit of the doubt and accepted their bad arguments as if they were good. And Ocean's point seems great. What if a heathen tuned into the show and thought you were talking about one thing, only to find out you were talking about another? And
this is a point that he made a little bit ago, and I didn't pause it then, and I'm going to pause it now just to say, I don't expect anybody to just take what I have to say on faith or take me for granted because they like me. I don't want that. I would like people to come to their own conclusions and to figure out what they believe and why, based on sound arguments. And if I'm not making sound arguments, then fine. But I don't think that... I guess my reasons for even kicking up this dust storm was never... Like, I don't care about historical usage of the word. Like, it's fine if there is that, but it's... At the end of the day, I value their allyship, and I believe they're acting in good faith, and I don't think that there's any reason to assume that they're going overboard. What they're asking is not that big, and I can see why it would... Yeah, at the end of the day, I'm not part of the marginalized group that is saying this affects us negatively, so I don't know exactly how it affects them negatively. I am in just about every other minority group I can think of. You know, I'm black, I'm queer, I'm assigned female at birth. I am both queer as far as my gender and my sexuality, and I'm an atheist. And there have been plenty of times when somebody told me that something was not an issue, and I'm like, yes it is, and just because you've never experienced that issue doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I think it's really hard to so easily dismiss this. You know, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm just too trusting. But when a group of people that is significantly smaller than me, and I haven't known to be, you know, snake-like or two-faced or just trying to get what they want or trying to just make things in their favor, says, hey, this thing is making life worse for us, and it would be real easy for you to change, I'm just gonna change it. It's not hard. And that's just my approach to this. I think that it's ridiculous how many people are basically just like, well, I'm not going to give in to what religious people want because I don't really give a shit what religious people want. It's like, but religious people are people. And not all the things that they want just because they're religious people have to do with the religion. Like, whether or not we use the name Talk Heathen for the show has nothing to do with whether or not the heathen religion is true. Those things aren't... Okay, I gotta get back into the video.
Called in to Talk Heathen thinking that, hey, this word's being used in a way that I don't understand. Oh no, whatever will we do? It's not like the entire history of the atheist movement. It's not like the entire history of call-in shows hasn't been.
This isn't about the pedantics. The worry is not that someone's going to call in thinking that it's a heathen show and be like, oh, it's an atheist show. The worry is that somebody is going to tune into the show thinking that it's something that is for their group and then find that it, in fact, is dismissive and mocking and othering of that group. Which... yeah, if I started watching a show that had queer in the title, or listening to a podcast that had queer in the title, and I turned out that it was actually queer bashing, or it had trans in the title, and it was actually run by TERFs, or something like that, that'd be pretty fucking upsetting.
Been about correcting people's misuse of terms, or letting people know how we're using a term. The whole point is to educate. The whole point is to say, you know what? There are people who use heathen in this way. We're using it in this way. And we have a long history going back at least to the 1611, which predates the usage, the modern attempted usage of neo-pagans for heathenry, predates all of that, as this is the word that was used to other us. Now, it's not a particularly popular word. It's probably not a hill anybody needs to die on.
Then I don't know why so many people are trying to die on this hill. That's another thing. Is there are people that have been like, I'm going to stop watching the show if they change the name. And it's like, why? Were you watching the show just for the name? I don't know.
And I honestly don't care whether or not Talk Heathen keeps the word, whether or not we end up changing it for some other reason. This is only about how we're going to make arguments and what kind of arguments we're going to make. And the fact that I thought it was ridiculous for somebody to say, you shouldn't use that word because it makes it more difficult for my religious friends to find each other. Now, maybe I'm not heathen enough for Ocean, but I'm heathen.
Again, that's a straight up straw man. That is a straight up straw man.
Enough for the King James Version of the Bible and centuries of smugly superior bigots trying to other anyone who didn't fit their mold. I won't be allowing another group to do it, and definitely not with bad arguments. I'm a heathen. Get used to it. I'll keep using the label, whether any particular show does or not. And if that makes it more difficult for people with irrational beliefs to find each other, That's just a bonus. We'll see you next.
So, yeah, I guess that I'm just not, I'm just not that much of an anti-theist. Like, I don't care enough to piss people off, to go out of my way to, like, not even going out of your way. Just, I get wanting to use the word. I get that feels empowering. I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. I don't think that anybody involved in this conversation is something very, like, silly and obnoxious about being like, what are you gonna do about it? I'm a heathen. Like, that's not what even anybody is saying. That's not even what anybody is trying to stop from happening. But the fact that you're doing it just to see whose gears you can grind is like, okay, sure, whatever. Like, all right. Good for you, kiddo. Yeah, I guess I don't have a whole lot more to say than that on this particular topic. Disappointing, in some ways. You know, Matt's somebody that I've looked up to for a long time, and there were definitely some very blatant straw man arguments in there, which was like, and the fact that he spent most of the video just talking about historical usage of the word heathen, specifically from the Bible, interestingly enough, was also kind of strange because, again, this isn't really about who's allowed to say heathen or who's allowed to call themselves a heathen, and nobody is talking about who is heathen enough to be a heathen and all this. That's, but when a marginalized group says, hey, when you use that word that applies to all of us as if it is synonymous with your group which oftentimes actively dismisses and others us, kind of hurts. And it kind of sucks. I am completely and I'd like to think I wish that everybody else would be too, because as Matt said, it's not really a hill worth dying on. I don't know why when a marginalized group tells you that hurts me, and it's really not that big of a deal or difficult to stop, I don't know why there's any further need for discussion on that, really. That's my 2 cents. And I don't know if I should even say this part. I feel like a lot of the people that have been more actively against this sort of movement to change the name have come from it from places of privilege to some degree. Granted, being an atheist is not necessarily a place of privilege. But a lot of them are cis. And I think that my already being in so many minority categories has made me a little bit more sensitive to this kind of thing. Just recognizing that what's hurtful to me and my group, I put a little bit more stock in that. And that's where I'm coming at it from, I guess. It matters to me. Whether it matters to anybody else is Yeah. And frankly, I don't think the name of the show is going to change. And I'm still going to host the show even if it doesn't change. I like the show. I care about what we're trying to do with it. I care about the message. I care about the changes that I can bring to the show. I care about having those call-in conversations. I care about all that stuff, but I also care about people, whether they happen to belong to a religious group or not. And this particular religious group in question has always been good allies to me, and I don't have any reason to ignore them or just. That's my 2 cents on that. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody who has watched. I appreciate your support and watching this, and I legitimately don't want to stifle discussion. So, I mean, if you have alternate opinions, or you agree but you have different points, or you disagree with something that I've said, please leave a comment. I don't want it to just be like, let's add some constructive criticism, a little bit more interesting and intellectual than just fuck this guy, fuck that guy, and fuck all of y'all. Like, I don't know. I want to have an actual discussion here about the points that are being made and about the arguments, not just ad hominem attacks. Although, I understand why you might want to. It was said in that video, but yeah. Alright, that's pretty much the end for me. See ya.